Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We'll be getting started here shortly. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to call the Castle Hills regular city council meeting to order and determine if a quorum is present. Quorum is present. We will proceed with the Pledge of Allegiance. Chief Zuniga, will you lead us? Thank you, Chief. Okay, first up, we have citizen comments. Ms. Crawford.
Hi, good evening. Judy Crawford, 107 West Castle Lane. I wanted to just let the council know we've had a lot of positive response from the lighting of the lights this year. Everybody really enjoyed it. They made comments. We had a couple of people asking for more events like that. So CHCO is going to look into maybe doing a survey and seeing what kind of events people are really interested in. 107 West Castle Lane. We want to also thank the vendors that helped Over the Top Cakes donated 100 cookies and like 2 big buckets of icing, and that was very popular. HEB donated money for our hot chocolate and cookies, and who else? Oh, Dutch Brothers donated 2 suitcases full of coffee and 1 of hot chocolate, which was a surprise. Our firefighters helped us, Public Works, Rick came up. Everybody was just so helpful. And so I thought it was a great event, and we were really happy with it. So just want to let y'all know that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everything. It was a great event. Okay, next up, we have the consent agenda. Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have a second? Ms. Daines? Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. First up, we have item 6.1, public hearing on an application for a special use permit from Crown Castle Towers 06-2 LLC at 2002 Lock Hill, Selma, Castle Hills, Texas, 72-3, more particularly described as CB 5778 P-99A ABS 260 CHCB 220, as found in the real property records of Bexar County, Texas, to formally authorize an existing monopole telecommunications tower, equipment, and facilities as per local code requirements. It is 9:34, and we're going to open the public hearing. 6:30. I'm sorry, 6:34. I didn't even know that had that level of dyslexia. Okay, if there's nobody here to sign up to speak, we will close the public hearing at 6:34 and proceed to 6.2. Discussion and possible action on ordinance number 2022-12-13 on a request for a special use permit for Crown Castle Towers at 06-2 LLC at 2002 Lock Hill, Selma, Castle Hills, Texas, 72-3, more particularly described as CB 5778 P-99A ABS 260 CHCB 220, as found in the real property records of Bexar County, Texas, to formally authorize an existing monopole telecommunications tower, equipment, and facilities as per local code requirements. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. This item was discussed and recommended approval by the zoning commission last week. And I do believe we have the client and or the client's attorney here as representing on behalf of Crown Castle, I believe. Thanks, sir.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Bebb Francis, 112 East Pecan in San Antonio. I'm the attorney for Crown Castle. And with us this evening via Zoom is Paul Peckins, I believe. Has he checked in? Well, Paul is the National Zoning Manager for Crown. Unfortunately, he was unable to travel today because last night he and his family contracted flu. And so he sends his regards, and hopefully he'll be on Zoom if there are any questions. We're here today to ask for, as was placed on the agenda, your approval of the special use permit for the continuing use of the telecommunications tower. This tower provides critical infrastructure, not only for the wireless carriers, but also for CPS and new technologies serving your community. Just a couple of facts why the towers such as this and the communications are so critical. The average is showing that over 50% of residences are now totally wireless dependent. And on top of that, the average Castle Hills home now has a minimum of 5 wireless devices. You probably have more if you think about the number of iPads or tablets, Ring doorbell systems. All that's dictated by and functional through wireless connectivity. But critically, as your public safety department has talked with you, 85% of all E911 calls are placed by wireless devices. And we all in this community live by, if you would, and react to those reverse E911 alerts, alertness about emergencies. But if your citizens don't have that connectivity, then they don't have the ability to take action. So we also have tonight Melissa Carrillo Cox with CPS Energy available for comments and questions. I particularly want to thank the Zoning Commission. We had 2 meetings with them. The questions were dynamic, and we're glad and appreciate their recommendation. I want to give special thanks to Louis. He was amazing to work with, so responsive. We worked on this for a number of months to make sure we have the perfect and the best application to present to you. So we're respectfully requesting your approval and available for any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Council, do we have any questions, comments, motions? I'm sure Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we grant the SUP at 2002 Lock Hill Selma, Castle Hills to Crown Castle Towers 06-2- for identification. And that is a property more particularly described as CB 5778P-99A, ABS 260, CHCB 220.
And Mr. May, if you could add and adopt ordinance number 2022-12-13.
And adopt ordinance number 2022-12-13.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. May, with the motion, and Mr. Joyce with a second. Mr. Isbrand?
Mr. Rapoli, what was the vote of the zoning commission on this?
Unanimous.
Unanimous. Were there any objections from the public on it?
There were residents, but no one spoke on the item itself.
And could you characterize the number of residents and or what the concerns were?
Actually, I'm sorry, it was for the next item, but there was
Okay.
no residents in regards to this particular SUP. It's actually the next one that had residents. Sorry.
Okay. And the height of 170 feet, which I think is what the current tower is this proposal, would this elevate the height of the tower above the tallest level or tower that is there now? That was a terrible way of asking that question. Is this the same height or is it going to be taller?
Ms. Francis, sorry.
Absolutely. Councilman, that's a good question. This is just continuing the use at 170 foot top of steel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions? Yeah, Mr. Paul?
Basically, what we're doing is increasing the capacity. We're not necessarily doing any structural changes to the area, correct?
That is correct. We're just asking that it be continued and under the appropriate permitting, the special use permitting.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Next up, we have, and thank you, Mr. Francis, for being here. Thank you, Ms. Cox. Next up, we have public hearing on application for a special use permit SUP from James Denny to modify an existing SUP for a property located at 1207 Jackson Keller Road, Castle Hills, Texas 78213, more particularly described as CB 5682. Block lot 30, City of Castle Hills, Texas, to modify the required amount of parking spaces as stipulated on a previously granted SUP. It is 6:41, and we're going to open the public hearing. If there's nobody to speak on the public hearing, we will close it at 6:41 and proceed to item 6.4. Discussion and possible action on ordinance number 2022-12-13-A on a request for a special use permit SUP from James Denny to modify an existing SUP for a property located at 1207 Jackson Keller Road, Castle Hills, Texas 78213, more particularly described as CB 5682, block lot 30, City of Castle Hills, Texas, to modify the required amount of parking spaces as stipulated on a previously granted SUP. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. As I mentioned, this SUP, along with the previous one, went to zoning last week and was recommended approval, I believe unanimously by the zoning commission.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Council, do we have any comments, questions, motions? Do we have some people signed up to speak?
I'm just here to answer questions. I'm James Denny with Gardens Council.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Mr. Isbrand?
So that's the same question I think you gave the answer to then. There was any members of the public who had opposition to this?
There was no one that spoke in opposition. There was just 3 residents who I assume received letters within the 500 feet. They were here. I don't think they spoke. Mark, I believe they didn't speak in opposition or opposed, approved for it. But
My notes show that no one spoke on this item other than Mr. Denny to respond to zoning commission questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schnall. And then my question for the applicant would be, could you summarize for the council why it is that you're requesting to have a reduced number of parking spaces there?
I'd be happy to. It's a pleasure to meet y'all. Got to tell you, this is my first city hall meeting. So thank you for your kindness and patience. When the property was built back in 1999, it was the parking was set to the zoning at that time. It's a special use property for people with Alzheimer's, dementia, for 17 of the 97 apartments. The other 80 apartments are for assisted living. So out of all the people that live there, we have 3 cars that are used by the residents. And 2 of them are there just for encouragement, that don't run anymore, that just makes them feel better that they can see their car. So so we have actually 1 driver. And so we use approximately most of the time 1/3 of the parking spots. And so as we're separating off the empty land and a couple of abandoned buildings, there's some parking spots there that are considered. So that's why we're needing to adjust the amount of parking spots needed for these 3 buildings.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. May?
Yes, sir.
Well, I was going to make a motion. if That's okay.
By all means.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance number 2022-12-13-A and grant the SUP dealing with the property at 1207 Jackson Keller Road, more properly described as CB 5682 block. I don't know if I need to say this, no, lot 30 here in the city of Castle Hills.
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have a second? Thank you by Mr. Paul. Mr. Denny, I have a quick question. And this might be, maybe it was articulated at zoning, but is the intent, once there's less parking requirement, to build on the parking lot spaces?
No, sir.
Okay,
We have no intentions at this time of building.
is the intent in the future to build on them?
It's open. There's no plans. So we don't have any plans at this time. So,
Thank you, sir.
yes, sir.
I have a quick question for Mr. Denny. Sorry, forgive me if my question is similar to Mr. Isbrand's, but I'm struggling to understand why you're doing this, why you're taking that lot and dividing it in two. Is it strictly parking?
That's the only issue that we have right now, and being able to separate off the vacant land. It's not being used by the assisted living. And
Yeah.
at this point, it's a huge resource. It's not for the city that's not being used. So it's one of the very few lots of that size that are still undeveloped.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
So, sorry, you're piquing my interest here. Is then the intent to potentially separate that land so that you can sell it?
There's no plans at this point. We know that the assisted living should be separated from the empty land so that it can function by itself. And in order to do that, we have to request the lower parking spots. So there's no plans for selling or developing the empty land at this time.
Okay. Council, any more questions?
I might add one thing.
Yes, sir.
And in doing this, it also reassures that any development would be with the proper parking spots according to the zoning laws.
Mr. Schnall, thank you, sir.
Mayor, similar questions were asked at the zoning commission, not quite exactly the same wording, but in one case, it was pretty much the same wording. And the one thing that was pointed out to the zoning commission was that even if the developer did have a plan to do something with the other parcel, that developer would need to come back to the city for building permits and may need to come back to the city council, the zoning commission, the city council for a new special use permit, depending on what the use was. If the use wasn't something that was permitted in that zoning district, then the applicant would have to come to the zoning commission and city council. In any event, the applicant will have to visit Mr. Zamaron or his successor for building permit and other types of procedures to develop the property.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. If there's no further discussion, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Thank you so much, Mr. Denny, for being here.
Thanks for allowing me to be here.
Yes, sir. Next up, we have a public hearing on an application for a special use permit from Audra Perkins for an SUP at 2211 Northwest Military Highway, Suite 130, Castle Hills, Texas, 78213. More particularly described as CB 5778, Block Lot 20, CHCB 219, City of Castle Hills, Texas, for an SUP to allow for the operation of a brewery with a bottle shop and tap room. We're going to open the public hearing at 6:49. I think we have one person signed up, Dr. Mike Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Mike Flynn, 111 Amerson Lane. And I'd just like to say that life is too short to drink bad beer. So I wholeheartedly endorse this application. I think it would be beneficial to the city. It would diversify and enhance our dining and drinking establishments. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flynn. If there's nobody else signed up to speak, we will close the public hearing at 6:49 and proceed to item 6.6. Discussion and possible action on ordinance number 2022-12-13-B on a request for a special use permit from Audra Perkins for an SUP at 2211 Northwest Military Highway, Suite 130, Castle Hills, Texas, 78213. More particularly described as CB 5778, Block Lot 22, CHCB 219, City of Castle Hills, Texas, for an SUP to allow for the operation of a brewery with bottle shop and tap room. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, this SUP was presented last week at the zoning commission. unanimously approved by the commission and recommended. And Mrs. Perkins, I believe, is here for any questions, the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Appley.
Good evening. Thank you very much for hearing our proposal for the SUP. I'm Audra Perkins and this is Frederick Ureta. And we're proposing to open a 7-barrel or 217-gallon nano brewery with a tap room, small bottle shop named Thirsty Pups Brewery and Bottle Shop. Frederick is a graduate from American Brewers Guild Brewing School and has been brewing professionally for 2+ years. I'm a designer by trade and both of us are beer enthusiasts we're both certified Cicerones, which is basically a sommelier of the beer industry. All that's to say we take pride in our beer and look to create high quality product and atmosphere in our brewery and tap room. We're planning to sell only within our tap room with the possibility of small distribution to local bars and restaurants. We do not plan to expand to become a large production brewery with extensive distribution. The tap room will be small and comfortable space with seating for around 30 to 40 people. And our proposed operating hours will be Thursday through Monday, 2 to 9 p.m. on weekdays and 12 to 10 on weekends. We plan to also have a small bottle shop where we'll curate some of our favorite beers from around the world, as well as local breweries to encourage a beer loving community for our customers. And one of our key goals is to give back to the community of Castle Hills, whether it be from charity functions or simply providing a comfortable location for groups to meet. We want to be available for whatever is needed. We appreciate your time and consideration, and we'd be proud to be the first brewery here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Perkins. Council, do we have any questions? Mr. Isbrand?
Ms. Perkins, before you leave, I'm curious what the draw to the location was for you.
You want to answer that?
Well, we as we were looking for locations, we noticed that this area does not have a craft brewery, and craft brewery in San Antonio. We have some numbers here.
You want me to give you the numbers for the two areas? Okay, so per capita, San Antonio is the second largest city in Texas behind Houston. However, the craft brewery count in San Antonio area is 27 with 19 in Bexar County. While Houston has 51, San Antonio has 77, and the Dallas-Fort Worth area have 53.
We don't have 77. Dallas.
Austin
has
I'm sorry,
77.
Austin has 77. So anyway, we're a lot fewer than.
As we were looking, we were trying to find a place where we could be obviously the first in that area, and also where we're not crowded around a lot of other craft breweries too as well. And we always liked Castle Hills as we were looking for a house in Castle Hills. We were looking for a house and we looked in Castle Hills.
We like the mid-century.
We liked a lot of the houses here, so we looked here as one of the places to open up.
As well as the restaurants around the area where we're.
Yeah,
ready
we
to
go to
open,
Los Espuelos and
we wanted to be.
the
near some
dim sum
restaurants.
place a lot, so yeah.
Did you find a house?
We are, but we're in San Antonio.
Okay,
It's a little out of our price range.
okay, okay.
We should negotiate.
Could you tell me again what your operating hours would be, please?
Right now, we're proposing is Tuesday through Monday. Where did I write that? 2 to 9 on weekdays and 12 to 10 on weekends.
Thursday through
Sorry,
Mondays.
Thursday through Monday.
Okay, I'm sorry, would you say it one
Yeah.
more time?
Thursday through Monday, 2 to 9 weekdays and 12 to 10 on weekends, which is Friday and Saturday night.
Okay.
So our latest time would be 10 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
One question, please.
Mr. May, and then we'll work our way down.
This is a quick question. It's not a make or break question, but are you considering development of a gluten-free beer?
Yes, I am. I'm working on recipes for a gluten-free beer. Yeah, I'm very obsessed with it because I know a few people who have celiac, so they were asking the same thing. So
Right.
there's a brewery that I know of that does gluten-free, and I've been just following them like crazy. So I just wanted to, yeah.
I'm ready for the vote. Just saying.
I also plan to brew sake, which is also gluten-free and considered beer. So but it's a different process. It's kind of a different process. So I'm learning how to do that too right now too.
We like learning new things. So.
Mr. Joyce?
Are you guys planning any outdoor seating?
The location has a very wide sidewalk in the front, so we're planning on having like 4 little tables, but that's about all that we can do with this.
Very
location.
limited though.
Yeah.
Okay. And forgive me for showing my ignorance. Is a bottle shop where you sell beer?
Yeah, it will be through our goal is to like showcase some local breweries around here too, and also stuff you can't get, in your regular like store. And just kind of have, it's not going to be super big. It's going to have maybe 20 to 30 bottles that if you wanted to, you can buy it here, and we'll showcase them in our, whether it's social media or anything like that, to, come on and check out this bottle. You can only get once a
We're
year.
kind of being selfish because there's a lot of bottles we know we can get if we have the licensing that we can't find anywhere. And we
Yeah.
would like to share that with other people as well.
Wonderful. Do you have your license?
No, we can't even apply for it until we have this SUP. So we don't have it.
But does anybody want to make a motion so we can get them a license?
Mayor,
Mr. Isbrand,
Mayor, I'd move adoption of ordinance number 2022-12-13-B or special use permit at 2211 Northwest Military Highway, Suite 130, as notated on the agenda item.
thank you, Mr. Isbrand. We have a second by Mr. May. I see that y'all are members already of the Texas Craft Brewers Guild.
Sir.
So I think that's gives me a lot of confidence aside from everything that y'all said, and shows me that y'all are really serious about your craft. And as you know, everything tastes better in Castle Hills. So that being said, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you very
here.
much.
Welcome to Castle Hills. Okay, we're going to pivot just a little bit and proceed to item 6.9, a presentation and discussion on the City of Castle Hills Comprehensive Plan developed by the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. Councilman Joyce.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, folks, on behalf of the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, we are very excited to present this work to you this evening. It's a culmination of a couple of years' work interfacing with citizens, staff, consultants, and subject matter experts. We sincerely believe that this document will be of great value to the city as we embrace our future. We owe a debt of gratitude to many, including the committee members, but Ms. McClin in particular, who has led us through thick and thin here through difficult times. It's been a long process. I'd like to thank also Mr. Rapley for his assistance, but especially for loaning us Scott Figueroa, the young gentleman who actually put this document together. We wrote it, but he put it together. So you'll see this. This will be on the website tomorrow. And we owe a debt of gratitude to Scott. But especially to the citizens who participated in the process. We had over 200 folks who looked at the surveys. We had a couple hundred at the speakers forum, and we had probably 40 or 50 at our various workshops. So it was great participation. Thanks to all. With respect to implementation, we propose a comment period, maybe for the next month or so, to hear from everybody, as many as we can. We're trying to get the document out to all the associations and all the folks. The presentation's on the website. The main document will be on the website tomorrow. And we just would appreciate whatever comments you can offer. And we would like to present the final document updated per the comments early next year. At that point, we propose to work with Mr. Rapley and his team to define scope and cost for what become the top priorities and incorporate them into the capital improvement plan. We don't want this document to just sit on a shelf as others have in the past. So in any event, with that as an introduction, may I introduce Ms. Amy McClin, who will walk us through a brief summary of the plan.
All right, I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes because I do not want to go. I could spend hours with this. It's so long. After many months, we are kind of in the home stretch. This process started actually in about August of 2020. And we started in earnest in gathering information from the public, from citizens, from businesses, from city staff in January, February of 2021. So we spent a lot of time kind of preparing to get to the point and coming up with the process, because we felt very strongly that the more input we had, the better product we would end up putting in front of you all for adoption. This is a draft and it's still got some holes. It still needs some more pictures. But we are very proud of what we put in front of you as a starting point towards the final document. There are a few more things to add to the appendix. We're hopeful that once that gets finalized, that citizens, council, zoning commission, ARC, whoever can go to it and plug through and find the information they need to help them make decisions, to help you all make decisions. We've taken a lot of time to get input that is broader than what you typically see at a council meeting or a hearing in front of the zoning commission or Board of Adjustments. Ideally, those appendix documents would be hyperlinks that people could then magically pop up, either the hazard mitigation plan or comp plan or whatever document is extra in the appendix. Hopefully we'll be able to hyperlink all of those and have a document that will be really easy for people to go to what they want to look at, because it will probably end up being over 200 pages by the time we're finished. We've spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours of volunteer work on this from the beginning to now. We've been able to use LPA architects, and we're very thankful that council gave us some funding to be able to use some professional assistance, especially as we honed gathering information from the public into some of the sessions that resulted in all the documents you see every week or every month on the board over there. This is intended to be long-range planning for our city. It's our intent that it will be changeable. So I'm hoping that one of the first things council will do is create a process to where there is a review, hopefully not ever having to go back to the drawing board and do this from scratch ever again. I think that's a waste of time to have to do that. But if we can make a document that has a process that makes it changeable and amendable when there are changes in technology or when there are changes in culture, or, you know, as society changes and the years march on, it's important to remember the past, but also look forward and give ourselves the tools we need for making decisions as times change. So I'm going to go through PowerPoint. You all have a draft in front of you. I would encourage you to read through it, ask questions, provide us with comments. I already have some comments from our committee, so there's some changes and some additions that we already need to make to some of the sections that are very well fleshed out already. We do recognize there are a few holes. I think our public safety section where we started talking about our different departments is a paragraph. We didn't get it finished before we had to get it to you all, but we will flesh that out before the final comes. Comprehensive plan is intended to be long-range planning. So we know that, and I'm going to skip through some of that. Mr. Joyce already gave some of the acknowledgements. Our goal with this was to provide a livable, our goal in the plan process was to gather lots of input and then use it to create a document that will help us grow intentionally and give us the tools that help us make good decisions. Like I said, we started way back in 2020 and we had COVID, which meant we were on Zoom. We have not really had any live meetings until we got to the public gathering. As a committee, we have not had a single meeting that was actually in person. It's always been via Zoom. This is a roadmap for the next 10 to 15 years. We have approximately 60 recommendations. By the time it's finalized, probably more like 75 to 100 recommendations on various topics. But we are honing those into a top priority list. And right now they're in one order, and they may end up in a very different order depending on the input we got last week from citizen input and from the Parks Commission on Saturday, and then what you all provide. One of the things that I am proudest of in this document is that we took a really, really hard look at our city and recognized that we can't consider Castle Hills as one entity for every decision. And when we started thinking about the different areas of town, it became very clear that we have the north of the loop and we have the south of the loop, and they are very different. But even that wasn't really specific enough when it came down to trying to look at the pros and cons of all the different areas of town. So we have divided our city into 6 neighborhoods. We are hopeful that this will help create identity and create excitement. In the southern cone is the area south of Antler. SoCo is kind of cool. I think it might be one of my favorite names that we have for an area. There's the estates and the terrace also in the southern loop or Solo. And every one of these areas has distinct characteristics. Every one of these areas has problems that residents are concerned about, and they're not always the same. When you go into the North Loop or Nolo, you've got Midtown, which is the area where we are right here with City Hall, the Edge, which is the area between Northwest Military and Lock Hill Selma, and then West of West, or WOW, which is probably my other favorite because they have such fun little short names. But every single area, if you start looking at it and thinking about it, is different, and they have different concerns. West of West, that area has already obtained rural residential zoning designation, which is an indicator that they are a very different part of town. Their needs are very different than the Edge, where you've got more mid-century modern houses on 3rd to half-acre lots versus some of the acre lots that we have in the estates. So we feel like as we go forward, having the areas divided will help us address concerns. I know my concerns in the estates is very different than some of the concerns in the Southern Cone, where you might have different, well, every area has different concerns, and some of that is addressed in our document. So we've got lots of recommendations on infrastructure, short-term and long-term. Some of these will actually end up in our top 10 priority list for things for council to look at. We have several members of the committee who have spent just, I don't even want to know how many hours they've spent in honing in on specific issues such as streetlights. And as part of this, we were looking at different walking paths that people take in the city and trying to create, different connections between areas so that people have appropriate and well-lit, safe places to walk. Okay, short-term, long-term, this is an example, this slide, of different ways that we can use bridges to create connections. Let's see, what else? There's so much. We have some transportation recommendations. We did have a resident that submitted some information for us that even goes into talking about via routes, so that you can actually see we have via routes that come through the city and provides public transportation. This is a graphic that is particularly interesting to me, that is based on streetlights, but it's looking at walking and biking paths through the city. And as Mrs. Scott and I were looking at this, we realized that it probably needs a little bit more information, but it's a good starting point because it doesn't really track the way we see a lot of people walking through the city. But it's certainly a good start for creating, that could be, if you want to know how to walk 3 miles through the city, here's a walking path you can take. So some added benefit to citizens without necessarily being that expensive to provide. City facilities are discussed quite a bit in our document. We discuss short-term and long-term related to city facilities, whether we make changes and modifications to City Hall, or whether the cost is, cost benefit of a brand new building. That's future decisions, but we have a lot of discussion of different ways to look at city facilities. We've got a few diagrams that have been done for the Parks Commission related to potential ways that we could make modifications to make our city property more accessible, more usable for both city council, for our departments, and for our residents. Mr. Middleman and Mr. Joyce spent quite a bit of time, well, Mr. Middleman especially, in reworking City Hall to kind of reorganize it. All of this is in here, some outside plans. We have discussion of public art. And while art seems frivolous, there's a quote that is not included in the document yet, but basically art does help add identity, and it helps add excitement and beauty, which make people proud of where they live, and sometimes can be destinations, such as in the background, you see Mr. Fitzgibbon's colorful light art, and it can be even make a destination where people want to go. Okay, so that's my 10 minutes. I am going to, there's just endless numbers of things that we've discussed in this document. So I'd like to open it up. If you have any specific concerns that you think we haven't addressed, or things that we've addressed, I would like to open the floor for questions if you have any of me comments.
I'm intrigued by your bridge, the bridge within the city. Was there any discussion about bridges to our obvious neighbor, San Antonio?
So actually, I think one of them, the discussion would be how we would connect Castle Hills probably across Blanco to like North Park or Park North. trying to create ways where you can go from vehicular traffic to bicycle or pedestrian traffic in other commercial areas. In the southern cone, our commercial areas are limited to the exterior. In the northern or in the southern loop. In the northern loop, we have kind of West Avenue, Northwest Military that create kind of a wishbone of commercial activity there. So it's not specifically discussed, but I think that that it would be important to make sure we are connected. We do have discussion of trying to create a way to get from the northern part of our city past McGimpsey up Northwest Military to easily access Hardburger. Since the city of San Antonio has such huge trail systems, if we can connect ourselves safely, then we're hoping that we can create kind of a two-way, our citizens can go out, but at the same time, for the brewery that just got the SUP, which is the kind of commercial development that we have envisioned in this document, that maybe it would bring people in using the same routes. So I will make sure that we make specific comment about connecting us to San Antonio as we can.
And one follow-up question, speaking of bridges, and I know this is near and dear to your heart, there is an unused space that's across from the edge that is creating some drainage issues. And I know there's interest in the county and the city for collaborative work. So is that going to be integrated into maybe an aspirational note?
So drainage is discussed a lot, and you're talking about the little park that's across from Carrollwood, right? Not the park, the drainage easement area kind of thing.
Correct.
I think we highly recommend having partnerships with any entity that we need to create those collaborations. That's the only way we will be able to afford and accomplish a lot of the goals and things that we could. I'll make a note of that too. Anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have any other questions? There's two things. I want to double click on what Mr. May said. I know that the intent from what I've seen through the city of San Antonio is they're revamping all of the creekways to potentially put in sidewalks. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to utilize the drainage system behind HEB.
So we have several recommendations, and I think the first one of them is in our priority, like the 7 that we started with. And that's the kind of the drainage area that runs through Midtown. And then secondary to that, because it's bigger, is the one that goes behind HEB. I mean, it's just a natural area that's already empty, right? If you can create some beauty and other things to make it usable, then those are certainly things that we've anticipated.
Forgive me for interrupting,
Yep.
but I think there's a picture of that, Amy.
Oh, yeah.
If you
So
move
let
down
me-
a little bit in the press.
Oh, yeah, we do. Oh, I want to talk about this one too, real quick, and I'll go back to the drainage. So we spent a lot of time looking, we as a committee felt like the buffers in the southern cone, especially with the duplexes along Jackson Keller, were really not effectively creating a buffer between San Antonio and the apartments on the other side. So that led us to a discussion of how could we create, I'll call them like little walls, kind of protective walls around our city that would help create noise barriers and buffers to nuisances, whether that's crime or graffiti or whatnot. And so we have, and it's in the document several times when it's appropriate to talk about, but we've created these areas where we talk about flex zoning, where we would potentially give owners options when they go to sell their property, to where you'd have a choice. You can stay residential, or you could go to either a higher density, like townhome type, or not apartments. We didn't really talk about that, but like the living up and the business down type work living space, which we're okay. So let me find the picture. That's a picture of maybe what Northwest Military could look like as kind of a main street. And green schoolyards. Okay, so this is some stream restoration and urban creeks that the San Pedro Creek Cultural Park that's been done in San Antonio, an idea of how you can make those look nicer and make them more usable. Sustainability, we feel like, landscaping and stuff can accomplish some of that. Was that the picture you were talking about, Mr. Joyce? The one? Okay. Oops, sorry. Okay.
The last thing I would add, and Mr. Joyce touched on it, but I think making sure that we have some soft goals that we can track towards, so that to Mr. Joyce's point, this doesn't sit on the shelf the way that some of the previous non-adopted plans have. And that way, this body of work is kind of a framework, which I think is the intent, and it kind of keys it up for what's coming next.
So in our conclusion, we have 7 priorities right now. Those may change a little bit. What we tried to do is start with some that affect the whole city versus that are specific for either the northern loop or the southern loop, to try to make it, everybody gets some benefit from the beginning. But depending on citizen input and your input, those priorities may shift. And the idea was that these would be the first 7 things that the city would focus on trying to accomplish. But as you accomplish those, we've set up an amendment process in the document where the next set of priorities could be adopted, so that it's a continual, you're kind of always gathering information and always setting your priorities as you start completing projects.
And last thing I'll say is thank you so much. I know that the value financially is probably more than the city could ever afford for everything that you all have invested in making this a reality and giving us the framework that we need for the city. Mr. Paul?
Yeah, Amy, on one of the previous sheets, memory's a little slow here tonight. On short term, you had something you talked about east of Blanco. How can we be east of Blanco? Because to me, east of Blanco is San Antonio.
No, I don't think I said east of Blanco. Connecting to Blanco, well, that was a mistake if I said that. I know we're west. I apologize for that.
No, it was
Maybe the
it was in the
eastern.
printed word. That's what I mean. And we don't have to waste time looking. I'll look for it again and ask you about it offline here. So,
Sounds good.
but I was just thinking, Jackson Keller, I understand that, Gladiola and all that, but east of Blanco.
No, so it may be a typo that we missed.
Okay, thank you.
Please help us avoid those in the final product. Any other questions?
Do we have any other questions, council? I know that we have a resident signed up to speak, so I think
Sure.
that's it. We have Ms. Bonnie Hopkins.
Sure.
Bonnie Hopke, 111 Amerson. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and everybody else in the audience. I want to thank the committee for their time and efforts in preparing the comprehensive plan, which now I understand is not quite done yet, but is on its way. I did see the presentation. I think the outreach to the community was important in the development of the plan, to get a plan that actually reflects the vision of the residents, business owners, and city staff. I think there are elements of the plan that we can all support no matter where you sit in this city. I think there are elements of the plan that will be less attractive to people, but I think there are parts that everybody can agree to. When the plan is finalized, I encourage council to accept the plan and begin the process of planning for and funding the future of the city and stop looking back. We have to move forward. We can't always be looking backwards. I have one request, which has been brought up many times. We as a city have created these types of plans that only sat on the shelf for years. Please make this a living document that is reviewed and updated annually or every 2 years as part of the budgeting process. Use it as an opportunity to meet with the community again and to confirm and update their priorities and to show that this is what we can accomplish when we work together towards a common vision for the future of Castle Hills. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hopkins.
Were there any other speakers on this one?
No, ma'am.
All right. Thank you, council. I appreciate it. Thank you for moving me up the agenda so I can make it to another meeting. Please send me your emails, questions, concerns, anything like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McLean. The last thing that I'll add, council, that Ms. Hopkins made a great point about is I think it's important that when we do adopt this, it's with a amendment that we revisit this hopefully in August when we have a new year end in advance of our budget I think that's a great recommendation. Next up, we have discussion and possible action on a presentation by Andrew Friedman of Samco Capital. The next steps in regard to the issuance of certificates of obligations for streets and drainage projects. Mr. Friedman, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you all very much. And I guess to start off, congratulations on a successful bond election November. Here tonight to continue that discussion and get really some direction from you all as to how and when we proceed with the issuance of these bonds for the streets and drainage projects. So from this point forward, you now have the authority to go out, sell those bonds at your discretion. Now, the decisions aren't so cut and dry as that. What we've been talking about over the past several months and really for all of 2022 is we've been in a rising interest rate environment. So with that expectation that interest rates were going up, the analysis, and it hasn't been updated from what you all, what we last reviewed, assume we'd be issuing these bonds at a 4.5% interest rate. I literally just stepped off an airplane coming from Amarillo, where we sold in Randall County just under $10 million in certificates of obligation. They're a AA rated borrower, and we did a competitive bond sale. We received 10 bids, which is a lot of bids, especially in 2022, and locked in an interest rate of 3.64%. So we've seen interest rates come down really over the last 3 weeks. Is that going to hold true? It's anybody's guess. So we could move now or relatively quickly to try to take advantage of that. But we don't know what our certified values and what the tax rate will be until we get certified values in July. So issuing bonds before we have at least preliminary values, which come out in late April, and certainly the third week in July when they're certified, presents a little bit of a risk that we can work based upon assumptions that we think we're going to grow this much or we don't think we're going to grow at all. And this is what the tax rate would be based upon those assumptions, and we can take advantage of the interest rates we know now. Alternative to that is we wait until the summer, whether that's July or August, to sell the bonds when we know we can tailor those bond payments to exactly the tax rate structure that we're seeking, but we're subject to interest rate risk between now and that time. So there's no perfect answer relative to moving sooner. And let's say that we underestimate or overestimate the amount of growth that we get. We can use other available funds, either out of the interest and sinking fund or just other lawfully available funds to help get the tax rate to where we want it to be. Because if you'll recall, going into this election and assuming that 4.5% interest rate, we're hoping that the tax rate doesn't have to go back any further than it would have been otherwise prior to the protest. So we were able to lower the tax rate a little bit this past year. The issuance of these bonds, again, subject to the property value growth we expect to receive this year, will just go back to the level that it was in the prior year. So that's kind of the state of the market and the decisions before you all as to proceeding. And certainly one of the things that we've talked about, and Mr. Trevino and certainly Mr. Rapley have been called on by all of the bond underwriting firms out there wanting to work for you all as a bond underwriter through what's called a negotiated bond sale process. If you'll remember, when we sold COs back in 2020, we did that competitively. We received a number of great bids. Interest rates were very low. And I believe I've forewarned y'all that the state of the market in 2022 has not been as advantageous to go through a competitive bond sale. But given that we're underneath $10 million and the bond sale results that I've seen as recently as 11 a.m. this morning, I would recommend a competitive bond offering to you all. But again, that's a decision for you all to make which route that the city would prefer to go, given the strong engagement on the competitive side for bonds of this creditworthiness and being under $10 million. That would be my recommendation, but certainly subject to you all's final decision. So with all of that, there really hasn't been any change in everything we've discussed up to this point, other than we now got a green light from the voters to proceed. Now, the question before you all is, when do we want to proceed? Certainly, project inflation and all of those factors are still out there. If we delay or the project costs going up, it's not for me to say, I'm not an engineer, but those have been considerations along with where we think interest rates are going for much of this year. So with that, Mr. Rapley or Mr. Trevino, the rest of the council, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have. But turn it over to you all.
Mr. Freeman, just to clarify, it's when and how to proceed is what you're looking for from this body, right?
Correct. Yeah. If you all said we're ready to go on this project and we want to get started immediately, we would put together a timetable to put together the bond offering document, go through the credit rating process, and get to a city council meeting where this could be brought forth to y'all, where you would approve those final interest rates.
And I don't want to speak for my colleagues too much, but I do want to add, I think you might know, we've already authorized the engineers to go out and do their due diligence. So I think the spirit is that we want to get this work going as soon as possible. Mr. May.
I believe, Mayor, we'll have a reimbursement resolution on the January council meeting, and bond council's been notified that we will.
They are drafting that. That'll allow you to expend current city funds toward this project and then repay the city with those bond proceeds when they close. And that's really a stopgap measure to keep the process moving without tying it strictly to the issuance of those bonds. You're borrowing from yourselves in the interim. Yes, sir.
Mr. May.
Just speaking for myself, that deal you got this morning, I like that one. I am a bird in the hand type of guy, and not to revisit the salt in the wound, but we're 2% higher because of the petition that forced us to have this election. So I don't want to be sitting here in April not having moved, and we're 2 more percentage points up. I'm ready to go ahead. That's my position.
Mr. Paul.
What's the take in your profession on the inverted rate going on now with treasuries?
With treasuries?
Yeah.
I think they're at the whims of market participants. I do think that as a recession takes hold, we're likely to see long-term interest rates come down. How and when that happens, I think is somewhat of yet to be seen. We've seen just a lot of whiplash, interest rates going up as much as 50 or 60 basis points in the course of a trading week, only to go back again. So I don't look at this as a sign that interest rates will remain at the levels that they are at. And even if you all said, we want to get to market as soon as possible, that's still the better part of 6 weeks to 2 months away. We're subject to that whiplash. Yet again, so much of what's driving the markets, obviously, is the economic data that comes out, whether that's the consumer price index, Fed minutes, and the market's perception of
What you're saying is you want to plan, we should plan to get on the move on the train, but we don't have to put it full throttle until we know at the end of the line what the interest rates are going to probably
We'll know
be.
much closer to that. And then we've got flexibility, unlike when we go through a certificate of obligation process where you all as a governing body adopted that notice of intention resolution that says we're going to borrow no more than this amount of money for these projects, and the city council is going to consider the sale of these COs at blank meeting date. We can't move from that meeting date because we've already established for the voting public that this is when it'll be considered. With these GO bonds, if we, press play and we get, 2 months down the line and interest rates aren't favorable and we've got reason to believe that we want to delay that sale for, some amount of time, we can do that. What we don't want to do is go into the market, get a bid, and then bring it to you all and you say, we don't like it. Tell them no, thank you. That's a little bit of egg on the face of the city. I'd say I'm not doing my job if we get that far along and you all aren't prepared to sell and have a good idea of what those interest rates are going to be. So I don't expect we'd be in that position, but we know, the week that we're posting the offering document, which is generally 1 week before the sale, say, this is where interest rates are. And you all, Ryan can apprise you all and say, we would still recommend moving forward, and you all could, give us some sort of a tacit approval that you're in agreement, you'd want to consider those bids. It's an imperfect system, admittedly.
Mr. Joyce?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Friedman, just to follow up a little bit on your 6 to 8 week timeline. Does that include the getting the rating, the city rating redone?
That does, yes.
Okay, and there's a cost to that?
There will be, yes.
And
And
yeah,
I'll have to work with them to negotiate what that rate's going to be, given that we've
okay,
paid most of one already.
okay, yeah. And during that period, you'll be able to pretty much zero in on what the interest rate will be. So next time you visit us, you'll be able to kind of tell us.
It'll be much like this. The rate today is 3.64%. When I come back a month from now, the rate will be what it is then, but that's, I would tell you, not a perfect indicator of the rate you can expect a month from now, just because, again, in years past, it's been a very steady market that we've been in. It has been so volatile that I just can't put much faith in where interest rates are week in and week out.
Right.
So,
Okay, thank you.
yes, sir.
Mr. Isbrand?
Question and a comment. No, it's a dumb question. I'm good at those, so pardon me. Can you refinance COs down the line?
We can, just with all long-term debt, or the long-term debt that you all have outstanding when we sell 20-year COs or bonds, they're structured with generally a 10-year call option, meaning that we can take them from the investor at a set time and later at par, meaning we can take them without penalty, whether we have cash to pay them off or prevailing interest rates are lower at that time, you refinance them.
Okay. I share Mr. May's sentiment. I have to say, I think 3.64%, as you use as an example today, is certainly something that sounds very appealing versus where we could be, or even where we thought we might be at this point in time. And no one can predict what the future will be, but that does give us some semblance of an option. It strikes me that, the voters didn't just vote to tell us something. They overwhelmingly told us something, and they overwhelmingly said they wanted us to move forward with this. They want it done. So I can't imagine that we would be inclined to want to wait and hope and see where numbers may be. I don't know if there's a motion that's needed tonight to direct it. If there is, and I see you nodding, yes, Mayor. So I would move that we direct Samco Capital to take the next steps in regard to the issuance of COs for streets and drainage projects.
I'll second that.
We have a motion on Mr. Isbrand, a second by Mr. Joyce. Mr. Friedman, I'm assuming that we need to also let you know whether it's going to be competitive or negotiated, or does that?
Yes, that would be helpful to know whether that happens right now at this meeting, or that funnels back to me through Mr. Rapley is fine. And it's not necessarily a decision you have to make right now. It's one that we need to make certainly, several weeks before we go to market.
Got you. I do have one quick question. If there's no further, Ms. Daines, you have a question?
I was just going to comment that based on what you had happen in Amarillo this morning, I mean, I would lean towards the competitive bid process.
That's certainly my recommendation. I always like that. The other aspect of it that I personally and selfishly like is it removes politics from the equation, where it's not, who's called on you and there's tons of underwriters and they all do such a great job that there's very few wrong answers out there. But when we put it out there and say everybody has an equal opportunity to submit their best bid, from my perspective, if the market will allow for that, and there are times where the volatility is so great that it doesn't, that's not the period that we're in right now. We want to get the best interest rate, the lowest debt service for the city. And I've just got too much concrete evidence that points to where competitive sales have done better than negotiated.
I do have one last quick question. Mr. Paul had indicated that we have some time to ultimately decide how to proceed and when to proceed. My question is, we would have to go through that credit recertification process, so we would potentially have those additional dollars on the line yet again, correct?
Yeah, once we have that rating call, we'll be back in that same position where they've S&P's done the work. Now that, if it's roughly 30 days before we're having a credit rating call from now, if we put our foot on the gas pedal and went as hard as we could. So you've got that amount of time before you've incurred any cost.
Got you. I think I personally, counsel and everybody here, I echo Mr. Isbrand's sentiments that the message was sent loud and clear that our residents want this done. And I think it's prudent that we give some finality to it instead of letting it drag out. I don't know that we would be doing any better to be wasteful of another potential $10,000-$15,000 on a credit recertification if we decided to back out at some point. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion?
Just a quick comment, if I may, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
We've already lost 7 months. Maybe it'll be 9 months by the time the obligations are actually sold. So I'm in concurrence with the idea of moving now for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any further comments? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council.
All right. Thank
Thank
you
you,
all
Mr.
very
Friedman.
much. We'll be in touch with the timetable and proceeding quickly.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have an update presentation discussion from Bridgehead IT on the Information Technology Capital Project and the assessment conducted on the City of Castle Hills Information Technology Infrastructure in December 2021, possible executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551-089 deliberation regarding security audits. Mr. Rapley.
Put it up there. Evening. Thank you all for y'all's time this evening. Yep.
Mayor and Council, I've asked Ash Surratt, say that correctly,
Yes, sir.
from Bridgehead IT to provide you an update on our information technology capital project. If you recall, council, last year we met an executive session last December. Bridgehead, as our IT consultants, provide an assessment, observation site report, and then prepared sort of a roadmap of what we needed to do to address sort of our IT hardware and environment itself. And of course, if you recall, there was a grade at the end of that executive session. So over the last year, we've been able to address areas with priority, most important, the replacement and modernization of our IT equipment. If you recall, last year, I did some minor reorganization of functions under staff here and placed Mr. Zamarone over IT services to lead the efforts and work directly with Bridgehead and to ensure we get these items done on the roadmap moving forward and or complete. I'd like to thank him for his oversight in that area. I will turn it over to Ash, and most importantly, he has a copy of the roadmap, I think, that was distributed last December. And at some point, I will get that out to you to see where boxes have been checked. Go ahead, Ash. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the roadmap is a living, breathing document that we keep up throughout the course of the year. We always manage that roadmap based on things that we discovered initially, and then things that we've taken care of throughout the course of the year, and then items that are still remaining that need to be taken care of. I did not put that in this particular presentation. I was keeping this a little bit more for general consumption this evening, but we're more than welcome to go into the details of that roadmap if y'all would like. Just quickly, just kind of run through some items that we had whenever we kind of began things. There we go. So a number of items that were painful at the very beginning. We had very aging infrastructure on the servers
Storage was very old, and we had a number of equipment that were failed or preparing to fail very quickly. We have outdated operating systems in the environment. And then something that we discovered after we started out was that we were on a very outdated email system. I'm not sure if any of y'all are aware of what happened to Rackspace last week, but they had a very serious breach. And unfortunately, they are the exact same type of hosting company that we are using for the email services currently. So it's a massive priority that we get moved off of these older systems. And that is actually a project that is underway right this moment. But the Rackspace incident just heightened how important it was that we got moved off of that older infrastructure. There's still some consumer grade equipment in the environment, some really small, just like local switches that you could go out and buy from Best Buy. They work in a pinch, but things that we needed to get replaced into a more enterprise friendly environment. And then just some other items that were kind of just painful as we got into realizing some of the situation in the environment. The servers were downstairs in the bottom floor. We had switches in the middle floor, and then we had the infrastructure where the telecom services all come in the attic, which was very disparate all across. So our discovery process took a significant amount of time and effort just to get our hands wrapped around everything that's here. And even over the course of this last year, items still continue to come up that we didn't know about. So it has been a very thorough learning experience over the last year. Projects that we've completed over the last year, obviously the most important one is that we kicked off with a new service agreement. We had those hours appropriated for the year so that we could get moving on taking care of full-time all of the service IT service requirements for the city. The next major thing that we took care of was we put in a brand new backup solution and redundant storage. There was not a solution in place currently to make sure that everything that is here we know is going to be safe and secure from a backup perspective. So that was the first most critical thing that we put into place. The next item that we put in was a new firewall. And the firewall is kind of like the main gateway for all the telecom services that come into the building. And that was something that we needed to upgrade because we also upgraded the bandwidth for the city. And we needed a new firewall that could handle that increased bandwidth. And the other major piece that went along with that was so that employees here would be able to remotely access servers and different equipment that are here. So that expanded that capability for us. And then the last thing that we just finished was the actual replacement of the server infrastructure. We actually got sign off on that project earlier in the summer, I believe it was. But the supply chain issues took a great amount of time for us to actually get those servers in-house. And we just completed replacing all of the server infrastructure, which was 6 servers that we actually took down to just 2 servers. And we have redundancy on that as well. So even if one of those fails, we can immediately fail over to the other one and still continue to operate. So we lowered that infrastructure and improved it as well. So those are the big ones that we managed to accomplish over the last year. A few things that we're still working on right this second. There's a lot of aging desktops in the environment. We've started incrementally starting to replace those desktops and get those up to modern operating systems. And the big one that we're working on right now is the migration of the email over to Microsoft 365. This project, unfortunately, is going to be tedious and painful. I wish it could go better, but this one is just going to be time consuming and painful. We're going to have to come out and kind of work with individual employees one at a time to do these manually. There just was not a way for us to do this in an automated way. So we're going to try and minimize any kind of downtime for any employees, which is why we'll do just a few at a time and move those across. I expect this to move into the next year, but we are in process right now. Few future projects that we're still continuing on. Obviously, we want to continue replacing some of the aging desktops, making sure that those are on modern operating systems. Some of the legacy things, Windows 7 is no longer supported by Microsoft. So these are just ones that we need to get out of the environment to make sure that we're getting the proper security for that. Upgrading all the operating systems. So while we did replace the aging infrastructure on the servers, they are all still operating on very old operating systems. So it'll have to be a separate project. And the reason why we separated that was because it was going to be very time consuming. We had to go through and analyze every single application that's on those servers and make sure that when we go to upgrade, all that software will still continue to work. So we have to work with y'all's vendors to make sure that we have maintenance with them and they will give us the upgraded software so that we can install those whenever we make those upgrades. So that's a little bit time consuming project. The main concern was to make sure that we had the infrastructure in place so that anything catastrophic happened, we could make sure that we can still continue to operate. And the last item there is security. Security environment is changing on a daily basis. The steps that we have made over the last year have really allowed us to get to a good point where we can start implementing a lot more security policies for the city that are going to really tighten up things for us and make us feel a lot safer. So once we finish up with this email migration, security will be another aspect that we will start operating on a lot more this next year. I believe the last one was where I did the grades. I don't know if you wanted me to show the grades, but
Maybe we can forego that.
for on that piece. We have moved up on that scale though throughout the course of the year. The major thing was really we had a sinking ship and duct tape and glue weren't going to save us any longer. So we really needed to shore up those beams that were in the ship and make sure that we could proceed forward. So the groundwork has been laid and is in process right this moment. And I expect us to be able to move a lot faster and implement a lot more items next year.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Surratt.
Thank you.
Council, do we have any questions?
Mayor, real quick, if you recall, the funding for this was taken out of the ARPA, the 297,000. A portion that was carved out for the replacement of servers and other IT improvements.
Yes, sir. Mr. Isbrand.
I'd just like to take a moment to once again thank the city manager and the city staff members who have been involved with this. I think it had been a long time since discussions of our IT infrastructure and its safety and security had ever been brought up. And this is having profound impact to the benefit of the city, its residents. So thank you for your leadership in that, Mr. Raboy.
Thank you.
I completely agree. Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick observation, comment, question. Can we ever really be secure? If people like Rackspace are getting hacked?
Unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast. There is no completely 100% secure environment, mainly because the weakest link in all security is people. Security training is something that we do a tremendous amount of now because people are the weakest link. So security training is vital these days to help people to understand where these attacks are coming from and things to be aware of. Email is still the biggest. Phishing is the most popular way that they're getting into things. And the biggest thing that comes along with that, though, is when people get very targeted about it, it gets very scary in those ends, because then people can, if they really know what they're doing and people aren't paying attention, they can send an email posing as the mayor. And if you're not paying attention to those emails, it's very easy to send out the incorrect information. The last year with COVID, the very prevalent one was a lot of companies were getting taken advantage of by ACH and employees and their direct deposits. And emails were being posed as employees sending in to have their bank information changed. And accounting departments or payroll departments, if they're not verifying that information, sometimes just automatically made those changes and payroll went to the wrong accounts. It's very scary. So education is the best tool out there right now.
We assume that's part of our deal with you guys. You're going to train the staff on security procedures.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, no further discussion. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Surratt.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, next up.
Mayor, I will forward a copy of the roadmap with what has been accomplished to date. So you have a copy of that. And if necessary, we'll come back in the future to provide another update as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Next up, we have discussion and possible action on funds related to the American Rescue Plan Act. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. What I would like to start out with is that, as you recall during the budget process, council had directed me with certain things in regards to, the tax rate, the COLA for employees and coming back with a one-time adjustment. What I've done is done some research about what other cities have done for an adjustment that some cities have done either mid-year or one-time payments. I provided you a memo that shows a breakdown of those different cities. One of the things I'd like to cover is, I've done this through a tier-based process that, if you were employed during the pandemic and you're still employed with us since the inception of the pandemic, which is under 44 employees, that there would be a higher tiered payment, a one-time payment. Obviously, as I mentioned, this would be in conjunction to the COLA that would be given to employees that would start January 1st. What in the memo I have provided you the research, what I try to do is give a broad range of what cities have done and then given options of different payouts. And I tried to align ourselves with similar size cities because some of the cities got similar size payouts for ARPA. What I tried to also find out is what COLAs they were getting. Most of these cities, except for one of them, have a different fiscal calendar than us. So a lot of these payments or pay adjustments were done at the end of the last year, which was the first quarter of those cities' payouts. And so what I wanted to do was give you some options. I've since passed out another option as well for a one-time payment. If you look at what Balcones did, they gave basically a 27th check, which they took out of their fund reserve, but would be reimbursing themselves, I believe, out of our ARPA for that as a reimbursable replacement under revenue. And Leon Valley was about 1,000 with the COLA they gave this year. You see some cities that gave 2,000, even one up to 3,000 based on the time that they were employed during the pandemic from that standpoint. So on the options I provided, I tried to give a range to what that might look like based on a two-tier being employed with the city during the pandemic to date, as well as employees that started on January 1st. So in similar sized cities, I'd have to range, between 2,000 and 1,000 that, either 1,500 or 1,800 one-time payment might be the spot for the 44 employees who worked here during the pandemic, and or the 1,300 versus 1,000 for the 9 full-time that were started since January 1st. Also, this in conjunction with, like I mentioned, the 4% COLA, but I also try to make sure that we're working to retain employees, be competitive, and make sure that we're similar to what other cities are doing to be competitive with employees.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Council? I'll ask a question just to to clarify, or Mr. Joyce, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Mr. Rapley for this analysis. It's very, very helpful on what could be, a little bit of a difficult question, but I don't know, having been an operating officer in a business for some years, I can tell you firsthand that there's nothing more costly than trying to replace an employee. The time spent when they're gone, first of all, double decking on the others who have to stand in for them, then the training time, then the ramp up time. It's a very costly deal. Secondly, I'd like to say that we have a terrific staff, and I think it's appropriate to reward them in this manner, in addition to the 4% COLA. But also, we're in a very, very competitive environment. At this time, we are still in a competitive environment. And I think if other cities are doing similar things, we need to do the same. We need to match them to keep these fine employees or face the cost of having to replace them. So I'm in favor of one of these options that Mr. Rapley has provided. I kind of thought the middle option made some sense, but I'm open to other discussions and thoughts. Thank you.
And again, Mr. Joyce, as you pointed out, it is tough to retain employees, but also in the fact that what I try to do with these options, most importantly, is work to also help with employees during the inflationary and the rising costs. Balcones, like I have to mention, did the one time, basically a 27th check. As I mentioned here in the memo, a one-time option like that to us is actually about 130,000. So, and I wanted to make sure you do have these options because it's important to know what we've spent through ARPA and what we'll have left for future projects. So again, giving a range of just below 100,000 versus above that 100,000, being 127,000 is closer to what a one-time payroll is for 80 hours per employee from that standpoint. So again, my thought process was, between some of the larger cities that have given, 2,000, 2,400, they did get a bigger payout because of population for ARPA. But I was trying to stay within, cities like Terrell Hills and Kirby and Leon Valley, who are in Alamo Heights that are kind of in a similar size city, who probably got similar payouts, if not just a little bit more based on population sizes.
Ms. Daines.
Thank you. Yeah, I concur greatly with what Mr. Joyce was saying about, sorry. If I get farther away from it. About retraining employees, I far agree that keeping the wonderful employees that we have is so much more beneficial to our residents and to the current city management than trying to retrain and hire new people. And hiring new people is really, really difficult right now. So I don't want to put us in that situation of needing to do that. In addition, I would say that when we were at the tail end of adopting the budget, I think it was one of the later September meetings, when we had some residents came up and spoke, and they all were very effusive about how much they appreciated the services that we had and the people who work here, and that we should pay them what they deserve and we should keep them and retain them. Which is one of the reasons why we did the 4% COLA. And I was going to say that I'm leaning towards the number one option.
Thank you, Ms. Daines. Mr. May.
Council, I agree with the last statement because this is not just about the deferment in 2020 of the COLA. This is about each one of our employees being what I consider overexposed to COVID during the COVID period. There were medical emergencies on our property at least twice. Every time the firefighters came to the property, and in one case, a police officer as an escort, they're going into an environment where they don't know what they're dealing with. And I know that that circumstance was replicated hundreds of times during the 2-year period that we're talking about. Given the fact these are ARPA funds, not coming out of general budget funds, I'm in favor of number 1, and that would be my position.
Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Paul.
What's the second sheet you gave us, Mr. Epley? There's a difference here, obviously, and I'm trying to put them together.
That's just the difference of what a couple cities did, just a one-time $1,000 payment to basically every employee. So you can see what that number is and how that affects the ARPA funds itself. I think, Mr. Paul, you even asked me the other day to show what 1,000 does do and total is. So.
A lot of these cities that you've listed here, as you already mentioned, because I was curious about that, they have gotten more money from the government than we have. And of course, the key always is, I agree that the greatest asset of a city are our people, but we also have to keep up with the operations of the city. So that's why when I was looking at this, I was trying to say, you know, I asked the question between 1 and 2, how big a difference is $13,000? Is that a big difference? Is that something to be used? And that's something I'm sure everybody up here is thinking of right now. Thank you.
I think, Mr. Paul, most important, and I think Mr. May touched on it, was, again, going back during a time when employees did not receive a COLA. And, you know, the 44 employees that I have here listed who would be in that first tier during COVID were all still working here at the time who did not receive a COLA.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Mr. Isbrand.
Mr. Rapley, I'm curious, looking back at some of these cities, and I noted, I think it's in this memo, and I know you and I had talked about it,
sir,
that a lot of these cities had given some type of one-time payment to their employees well before now. I think we're at the caboose on the train of municipalities.
And that's as a result of our fiscal calendar, you know, of course.
And I'm glad we've been able to take care of that finally. I guess what stumps me a little bit is that, so that means that those employees were given the payment for their work during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, which was 20 and 21. And then I'm looking at the proposal that Mr. Rapley has given us, and I see employees that are included in this that are coming on board in 22. And I thought it was my understanding that we were giving this payment in recognition for the service that had been conducted during the pandemic. And we have allotted a 4% merit increase already to all employees. So can you tell me of these cities that you have listed here, how many of them were paying people who came on board after I guess we'll say the height of the pandemic, or after the pandemic had been brought into?
And again, in researching this and talking to other cities, you know, most of them, or majority of them all, except for Balcones, they did a one-time this year to help employees. It seems like majority of them all paid at the end of the year last year, November, December. Again, they had already started their fiscal calendar. They probably had received their first set of dollars from ARPA and utilized that to pay for the employees at that time at the end of what you call the pandemic. I kind of did research what other cities were doing, and it seems like that was sort of the sweet spot from a time frame of when COVID had started or been first declared in cities, and then when it kind of had sort of ended. But it seems like most of, and all these cities, except for Balcones on this list, certainly paid at the end of last year of 21.
Right.
And again, I think the idea when we discussed it during the the budget process was, and I apologize, I know we spoke about this, and if there was a sort of monetary amount given to me during that time, I apologize. I just wanted to come back with options because council had directed me to come up with a one-time payment as well as in conjunction of the COLA for the next operating year. With that, it does seem we're at the tail end, but the way I, again, posed it for a tier 1 is that they had been there since the inception. Now we do have, 9 full-time employees that have come on since January 1st. Not necessarily working here during those COVID times, but it seemed the appropriate thing to give them some portion of a one-time payment in conjunction with that COLA as directed by council. So that was the rationale. Whether that's good, bad, or different, it seemed that all these cities just decided at this one time to pay employees. And this is sort of the rationale that I came up with the research from that standpoint. Begin because you do have majority of employees who have been here and who did not receive a COLA back when we did the budget 2 years ago. So that was my mindset. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, or my judgment, then that's on me. But I thought it was appropriate to take that measure to help majority of the employees who've been here for a long time as well.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that very much. And I'm not in any way suggesting, I don't want to include these 9 people in here, but I think I want to understand what exactly we're doing. We represented here that we were giving a one-time payment in recognition for the work well beyond the call of duty of the entire city staff during the pandemic. And we have added people in who weren't here during that time. We have already given a 4% merit increase to everybody. We have already given retention pay, at least to PD, to keep people. So I hear us saying, oh, this is for pandemic. Oh, this is for retention. Oh, this is for whatever. And I would just caution us about how we frame this. So are we going to be revisiting this next year too? Because we did it this year and we said for some reason, there's this perception that a 4% merit increase wasn't good enough, which as a state employee, I'll tell you, I'd say a 4% merit increase is pretty good actually. Again, I have no objection to allocating dollars. I think we ought to at least be transparent about what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. And it does give me a little bit of heartburn to look at this and think about that we have $800,000 left in the ARPA funds that's supposed to go for all these other things that are still to come. And the one proposal we have here is going to take, significantly well above $100,000 if we go that route. That's a big chunk of money that would come out of that ARPA money that, we would not have back again. I don't dispute our employees are well deserving of everything we can give them, but I think we should be transparent about why we are doing this or what we are doing so that we can decide it appropriately. When we went through the budget process and we settled on a 4% merit, I'll tell you the discussions that were at least informally happening then, I have seen incrementally this number go up 3 or 4 times since then to the number that is given to us tonight as the tier 1 payment. If we wanted to give employees a 5 or 6% raise, we should have given employees a 5 or 6% raise. But I just think that it would be good if we could determine what it is we're actually intending to do here. And exactly how much out of the ARPA funds we're willing to be willing to, not lose, but to spend, given that we have a finite number of dollars there. That would be my apprehension on this. Certainly everyone here is deserving of every single penny we can get to them because they all do an extraordinary job. We also have fiduciary responsibility.
Councilman, and I just would like to, what I did in the memo, how I broke it out too, is that, this whatever pay amount option close to serves as sort of 1/10 of what ARPA receives. So that's kind of way I carved it out to say 1/10 of the money could go to assist employees in this manner. What I like to do is go back, and I think I gave this out during the budget process that this had about 22 cities on there, which talked about, COLAs. And it seemed like most were leaning towards 6-7%, and a large amount of cities had merit pay as well. So again, I'm trying to find that balance. And again, the rationale comes back to, hey, we have a large majority of people personnel who are here during COVID from that standpoint. And I think part of it is, I feel making it up for the employees who didn't get a COLA a couple of years ago as well, who are still here. Again, that's my rationale and why I came up with this. And it certainly would have been different if I remember or recall, and it's probably my fault if that's the case, if there was a monetary one-time mentioned. I was just charged with coming back with a one-time option for employees in conjunction with the COLA.
Yeah, and here again is, I guess, what bothers me a bit. This is now the makeup for the COLA that was missed a couple of years ago. Well, is this for the pandemic? Is this for the COLA that was missed a couple of years ago? Is this because council only approved the 4% this year and you felt we should give more? What is, if we could just say what it is we want to do here and have it on the record, because otherwise I think we'll be revisiting this issue every year going forward, because it's now become the catch-all for these issues.
Again, I think what I tried to do was in research to show, again, what other cities done and sort of find something that's complementary to what they did in similar size city.
Do you have a recommendation? You've actually given us now 6 different things, but do you have a recommendation?
If I had to go with a recommendation, I would probably go with option 2 right now, which is the 1,800 to during the 44 employees who were here, and then 1,300 after January 1st, and then 1,000 part-time, which is a total of 114,000 out of the ARPA funds.
Thank you.
Mr. Rapley, your dissertation a while ago, in your reasoning why and what and wherefore, it didn't take into account, again, which Councilman Isbrand brought up, the people after January of 22. They weren't involved in any of that. They weren't involved in working here. They weren't involved in the stress, the strain, the innuendos that went along with the work job, things like that. So that does kind of confuse me a little bit, that what rationale then would you have for those who were not exposed under what we are trying to do?
Mr. Rapley, before you answer that, I'd like to put this out there just so we can figure out what exactly are we talking about. How many full-time employees did we add after January 1st?
That would be the 9 there on the memo. That's, I believe,
It's
two firefighters, 4 police officers. That makes up the 9. Trying to think what else from that, but it's 9 full-time since then.
Came on after January 1st this year.
Came on after January 1st.
Got you. And if you want to answer Mr. Paul's question, I just wanted to make sure we have that out there.
Understood, Mayor. Again, I was trying to find out, trying to bring back a lower amount because it was after January 1st. And the idea that was being compensated for working here during the time period of COVID or the pandemic, or when it was declared a health emergency, that those employees are still here. The idea that I was directed to come back with a one-time payment in conjunction with the COLA doesn't make sense to essentially pay someone prior to that because they weren't involved with COVID here with our city. And it seemed like after January 1st, I just used that as because our budget started this year as of January 1st.
But again, you isolated 9 people specifically because they came in afterwards.
Yes, sir.
So the question becomes, in my mind, either if they came in afterwards, how much, I realize that you're not proposing as much. But, well, you know what I'm asking. Thank you.
Mr. May.
So I agree with Councilman Isbrand that we need to be transparent. So I'm going to be transparent. I'm going to put it on the record. There are actually 4 reasons why this is justified, and then I'm going to spell out the option I think is appropriate. The first one is the hazard pay for ongoing higher risk factors. It did not stop after 2021. It continues today, 2022. We're having more people go to the hospitals. The hospital beds are full. The RSV combined with that and the flu are causing deaths again. So each one of our employees is continuing to be overexposed. The second one is the deferred COLAs, which we've talked ad nauseum about. The third is retention. And I don't think we talked about this, recruitment, because the way we message determines who is going to be attracted to be employed by this particular city. That is number 3. Number 4 is the work coverage due to the very large gaps we had in almost every single department. And some of those were huge. So we had a couple of years where we had individuals that did the lion's share of the physical labor that we very much appreciate. Now, I like the breakdown because it does tease out the full-time that arrived at the latter part, and then the part-time, because that is an apportionment. But these 4 reasons, I think, are more than justified. And my motion is going to be that we approve option number 1, which is the 44 full-time at 2,000, the 9 full-time at 1,500, and the 4 part-time at 1,000, one time coming out of the ARPA funds.
We have a motion on Mr. May. Do we have a second? Ms. Daines? So before we get into further discussion, which I feel may be imminent, I do want to add that I think it's important how we choose to invest these dollars in our city. And I think that it's important to remember that the perception. I completely understand what Mr. Isbrand and Mr. Paul are talking about, but the reality is, to those 9 employees who are not watching, who are not here, when they are discussing their salaries with their peers, they might not see it the same way. And I think for what we're trying to do and accomplish, we may end up working backwards by making those 9 employees feel disenfranchised, because today they are all working with the same level, with the same care, with the same desire to serve the city of Castle Hills. And that would be my word of caution as we continue to explore this and potentially discuss bifurcating and taking them out. That's all I have to say. Mr. Paul?
I wasn't talking about taking them out. I was questioning the level of funds that we were trying to do in an appropriate from one to the other. That's all.
I'm with you. Ms. Daines.
Thank you. Also, to be transparent, I don't believe that the pandemic is over. I don't believe that, to Mr. May's point, I'm at the tail end of the flu. There's people going into the hospitals. There's people that are still continue to suffer. And I don't think that we are back to normal, so to speak. And I don't think that it ended, by January 1st of 2022. So I don't think that it's appropriate, also for the reasons that the mayor pointed out, to take these people out of this one-time payment. In addition, I lean towards the belief, at least the way I voted for the COLA funds, was that 4% wasn't enough. That we were at 8, maybe even 11% inflation when we were voting on that. To your point, if you're a state employee, you're right. 4% seems very, very generous. But we were a little bit behind the curve on that. And I'm very committed to trying to make people want to be here so we can retain great employees. And so for the record, I also would want to vote for option 1.
Mr. Isbrand.
I just want to reiterate Mr. Paul's comment. No one suggested taking them out. No one suggested taking them out. But this is a very aggressive amount of money. And I even hate to say it this way, but I will, because I don't want to make the judgment on risk. But you had people who went through 2 years of the darkest days of the pandemic. They will get if you adopt Mr. May's proposal here, they will get $500 more than someone who came on duty on January 1st of this year. I just think there's a real disparity in some of these numbers. But again, no one suggested taking them out.
Mr. Joyce.
Would that suggest maybe a little bit of adjustment? Perhaps the 44 full-time could be 2,000 and then maybe reduce the 9 full-time a little bit, maybe to 1,200 or something like that. Perhaps more reflective of the effort compared to those that were here through the full 2 years. And maybe the part-time drops a little bit to 800 or 900, something like that.
That seems like a healthy compromise, Mr. Joyce. And Mr. Isbrand, I'm sorry if I misextrapolated that. Council, do we have any comments, questions, considerations? Mr. May.
It's my motion. I'll entertain an amendment.
Okay, I will amend Mr. May's motion by continuing to support option 1, but making a couple changes. The 44 full-time staff members would stay at 2,000. The 9 full-time would adjust to $1,200, and the 4 part-time would adjust to $800. I'm not sure what the math is, but it's.
And I'll accept that amendment.
So was that a second, Mr. May?
I'll accept the amendment and
Okay, we have a second on Mr. Joyce's amendment. Mr. Isbrand?
I'm sorry, is there a way for us to calculate what our total spend would be then on this?
I think it's $3,500.
It's probably around 4,000, I think, with all the accoutrements. I do have a question while we wait, Mr. Rapley. And a slight ask. Would it be appropriate and or acceptable to include a letter from the city council as a result of a payment being issued, letting them know what our reasoning is and everything associated?
Absolutely, Mayor. That's council's wish and desire. We could do that.
I think that would go, for me, I think it's important that they know where this money is coming from and why, instead of just seeing additional funds on their check. Well, and maybe that too. Welcome back, Mr. Schnall.
We've been waiting to continue the meeting until you return, so now we can pick up the agenda.
I want you to know, I walked out of here as a board member and I'm walking back in as vice chairman of the board.
Congratulations, sir.
We're actually on the IT item. We're waiting for you to go into exec. I'm just kidding.
Mr. Schnall, just so you know what this awkward silence is about, we're discussing an amendment to the one-time payout, and Ms. Davis is calculating the financial implications for the amendment.
I would have ballparked it in my brain if I had known it was gonna delay us this much.
Well, the top line is 30.
Okay, my back of the napkin math says 7,800. We'll see what Miss Davis has to say.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. So we're looking at about a $5,000 difference. Mr. Joyce.
Make a comment, Mayor. I don't know if y'all trust my math, but I did a calculation of what would be left in the ARPA. And if my numbers are right, it's probably going to be somewhere in the $560,000 range, plus or minus. By the time you take out the 297, the 109, and the 35, that leaves us with about 667. If we take out another 122, that leaves us about, roughly 560 or so.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce.
You're welcome.
Mr. Rapley, question, are you included in these calculations?
Yes, Mayor, I am included, and as I mentioned here during the cities here, I broke it down that city manager and department heads and majority of all these cities did get a payment as well, so. But that would be a separate council decision, and what that amount might be would be a separate council decision.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Any further discussion? Okay, well, we have an amendment on the table by Mr. Joyce, seconded by Ms. Daines. All in favor? Unanimous. Now we go to the original motion by Mr. May and Ms. Daines. All in favor? So, yes, okay, perfect. Unanimous. Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Rapley.
So do you have to make a decision on mine separately, or is it included?
I thought you said you were included.
Yes, I am. I just thought that had to be separate.
Okay. We can entertain a motion for that, Ms. Daines, if you'd like. Okay, council.
Mayor, before we proceed, again, I know that y'all have been very supportive of the employees, and as you wish, we can put a letter together and submit to them. For me, I just like to say, thank you for doing this for the employees. I think that speaks volumes that the city council supports and values the city employees. And, during my time here over 5 years, I've never seen a more supportive council to the employees, and just want to thank you directly.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. I'd be happy to work with you and make sure that we can articulate the spirit of where this came from, so the employees know why we chosen to invest the dollars that we have. Moving on to item 6.11, discussion of possible action on ordinance number 2022-12-13-C, amending the City of Castle Hills Code of Ordinances, Chapter 36, related to the sanitation collection services conducted by Public Works. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, last year, we took the steps to modify Chapter 36, specifically 3630 and 3632. And I think in regards to the service collector and container size, and so we actually had something come up with a resident who, I'm not say challenged it, but we had to examine it further. And so we wanted to immediately get this in front of council. So essentially we were just striking the phrase the equivalent of, because it made sense that if a resident who had one 86-gallon and a 10-gallon, it seemed permittable to use. And we want to make sure that we specifically have 3 containers at 32 gallons. And so that's all this is a tweak, minor tweak and the language and striking that phrase from there to make sure it's consistent, and then also to ensure the safety of our collectors out there on the container sizes.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Mr. Isbrand.
Mayor, Council, I'd move approval of ordinance number 2022-12-13-C.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Isbrand, a second by Mr. May. Any discussion? Ms. Daines.
I read this after some next door discussion, and it definitely was ambivalent, to say the least. And I did see how you could think you could have, 2 48-gallon ones and you are still in compliance. And so I think this clarifies, and I think it's necessary.
And again, I think, Mr. Harada, we leave the friendly little tags to let them know that the container size is out of compliant or needs to be adjusted. This exactly spells it out to say 3 32-gallon containers, and obviously enforces necessary if someone is not in compliance. So, thank you.
Mr. Joyce, did you have a comment?
No, Mayor, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. In that case, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Next up, we have item 6.12, discussion and possible action on amending the investment policy for the city of Castle Hills. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. As a discussion point from the selection of the treasurer, I think the last couple meetings, and then I think last meeting selecting Mr. Paul as a city council member as treasurer, I was requested to bring back the investment policy for review and consideration. Under the section responsibility control, that's where we have the language that the city treasurer, a then current sitting member of the Castle Hills City Council, appointed under separate actions by the city council and the fiscal manager. So basically what I wanted to do was bring this back, and if council wishes and desires to change the language in there, then we would actually bring back the policy itself and a resolution that supports that change. But I did it right now to reflect if council had the desire to modify the investment policy at this time to change whether it's a sitting council member as a treasurer, or if you wanted to expand on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. We have any discussion, comments, questions? Mr. Joyce, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I really don't have any objection to opening up to those who are not on council, because I think it's quite conceivable that we could have a council that really doesn't have somebody with that particular expertise. And it may be desirable, but I think we need to be very clear about the qualifications and intent of the person that might be outside of council taking that treasurer position. So I would suggest that we give a little bit of thought to what those qualifications might be before perhaps tonight we could say, yes, we're going to open it up, or perhaps just ask Mr. Rapley to do a little homework and figure out what the proper qualifications would be for a treasurer. Just my thoughts.
I think that's a great idea. We can do potentially discuss what those qualifications look like. Mr. Schnall, could you tell us what maybe you've seen in other cities?
I think though, Mayor, if we did that, we'd have to develop sort of an RFQ, correct, and go out for that as well, Mark?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
What I've seen in other cities is that cities our size and some a little bigger have a professional employee who is the finance director, who also serves as city treasurer. And that's the typical situation in some cities between 5,000 and 10,000 in population, where I have been or am city attorney. We had the good fortune of having a financial professional on the city council for many years who assumed that role. I think there was a 2-year period, though, when Mr. Gregory was not on the council. I don't know who the finance director or who the city treasurer was during that 2-year period. But because we have been unable to fill the city finance director position, I think Mr. Joyce's suggestion of developing some kind of a list of qualifications for someone to be the city treasurer would be appropriate. There is also a requirement in state law that the city treasurer take a required amount of training. I believe it's 10 years. During the first year, the person is serving as city treasurer, and then I think 8 years, either every year thereafter or every other year thereafter. Hours, what did I say? Hours, sorry, hours. So, that is an expense the city would bear. And I think that it would be, if it was an employee, if we had a qualified employee, that would simply be part of that employee's job description. If we don't have a qualified employee, then it would be the city's responsibility to cover the cost of that training, and probably including an hourly stipend for the person to, take that time out of their other responsibilities to serve, in serving as city treasurer. And so one of the other things we might look at in the investment policy is trying to find, maybe defining right in the policy, the desired qualifications. I wouldn't necessarily make them exclusive, but I would state pretty clearly what the minimum expectations were in terms of qualifications.
Thank you, Mr. Schnall. Personally, council, one of the things that I would mention is I like the idea of the checks and balance component of having somebody else be the treasurer that maybe isn't necessarily involved with finance already. No disrespect to Ms. Davis, but just generally speaking, I think given what Mr. Surratt was saying, we just want to make sure that we are not being susceptible and we are having appropriate checks and balances. Mr. Isbrand? Okay. Council, do we have a motion? Mr. Joyce, thank you.
I move that we direct Mr. Rapley and his team to develop appropriate qualifications for a treasurer, city treasurer, who could be outside of city council and outside of staff.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Thanks, Mr. May, for the second. Just a point of clarification for Mr. Rapley and for everybody here, is the intent that Mr. Rapley puts those qualifications together and we discuss that at a future meeting? Okay. Mr. Isbrand.
Just one question about that. So to Mr. Schnall's comment about cities that have a finance director who serves as the treasurer, will these qualifications be applicable if we were to be in a, I guess the question is, are you still looking full-time for a finance director, Mr. Rapley?
Well, I think as I mentioned to council previously that Ms. Davis, in changing her role, she's taken on a lot more of the duties of a finance director. And then we have Ms. Wallace, who's assisting from a technical and or consulting standpoint. That seemed to has been working out very well for us in the finance office. It's been very difficult to, I think I had that application out for a few months, and I think I got one application who had no accounting background.
Yeah. And I don't want to complicate it, but it does seem that if in the future there's the possibility we would want to consider that perhaps as part of the due diligence or research you're doing related to Mr. Joyce's motion, that could be considered.
What I can tell you in my previous cities, being larger cities, is that there was not a treasurer, that the CFO or the finance director was the person who would advise council.
Okay.
Mayor,
Mr. Palm, sorry.
to piggyback what you were talking about with Mrs. Davis. Ms. Davis, do we have a backup plan as far as, I suspect she needs help in there part-time or something? Because there's a lot of hats I see her wearing, including the passports. And now we've put this also on her. So have we thought about that and you're going to do something about that?
We're already ahead of you, Mr. Paul. We are actually bringing
Wait a
someone
minute,
in.
you're ahead of me? Come on.
We're in the process of bringing someone in who's going to be able to help out in
Okay.
that office with certain duties
Okay, thank you.
to alleviate Ms. Davis.
Any further discussion, questions, comments, concerns? Okay, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Okay, next up, we have announcements of mayor and city council members on items of community interest. Mr. Isbrand.
First, I want to thank the members of the city staff who did such a beautiful job of decorating the dais and the council chambers for the holidays. Thank you very much for that, making it all festive. And then I'd like to wish happy Hanukkah to those who begin their celebration this coming weekend.
Mr. Paul.
I think lighting of the Christmas tree and all the events that have been brought forward by our community organization, our women's clubs and things like that. I really think that adds to the city, and I've heard so much positivity as far as attitude and thinking how well it is. I just want to thank all of them that's put and worked hard at this.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. May.
I wanted to note the passing of a longtime resident of Castle Hills, Bill Cobb. He lived in the neighborhood of West Avenue in Cremeria. He always flew his Marine Corps flag, and he certainly gave me many ideas about drainage issues. And I just wanted to say that in memoriam. He's the kind of resident we need. I just also wanted to commend the committee on the master plan. Fantastic work. I look forward to carrying that forward. And finally, it's been a stressful year. I hope everyone on council has happy holidays and is kind to themselves and their families.
Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Joyce.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, everybody. Thank all for your hard work. Good luck in 2023.
Ms. Daines.
Yeah, I wish everyone a happy holidays. I'm so grateful to all of the hardworking residents who've put together the Christmas tree lighting, as well as the city staff who put their efforts into that. I mean, the tree looks amazing. The common looks fantastic. I love the lights. The kids really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Daines. We also lost a very visible, outwardly serving resident, which was Judge Cassup, who passed away recently. Judge Cassup has served the community for a substantially long time. So I do want to take a moment to recognize him as well. On a more positive note, I wanted to congratulate our intern Scott for graduating with his master's degree from St. Mary's. Thank you, Scott. Mr. Rapley, I would caution you, as Scott is after your job.
You can have it. I would like to say that Scott has been instrumental. He started out as an intern for us in his undergraduate degree. And then he says, I really like this whole city government, city management thing. And he says, I'm going to enroll and get my MPA. I said, well, you're going to need an internship, so you might as well stick around. And then, of course, we brought him on board part-time to help us with the website and all the other stuff that he's been able to help us with, including that comp plan, which was amazing as well. He's spent a lot of time on that as well. But I congratulate him for graduating as well. And he'll make a fine city manager one day, hopefully better than myself.
He has big shoes to fill.
Just a reminder, we'll go through this again next Wednesday at a special city council meeting. Just have a couple items to address, and hopefully we can have a little something before the council meeting, but we'll be in touch on that.
Okay, thank you. And two other things I wanted to mention. Probably about a week or two ago, I was at Clementine, and there was an international food writer that was there dining with her husband, which I thought was amazing that Castle Hills is kind of being recognized potentially if she writes about us on an international level. And lastly, I want to thank everybody for the lighting of the lights. It was amazing, and the weather was slightly less than perfect with a little bit of precipitation, but the turnout was probably the best that we've had even before COVID. So thank you so much to everybody that made that possible. I know it was a labor of love that was done by all. That being said, Mr. Rapley, if you don't have anything else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
We have a second. Second by Mr. Joyce, all in favor? Unanimous. It is 8:46. The meeting is adjourned. Everybody have a good evening. Thank you for being here.